questions over his wins at UFC 284 to where that leaves him ahead of the second half of 2023, there are more than a few unknowns surrounding Islam Makhachev's future, but it does seem as though we're getting closer to some concrete answers. UFC 284 brought us one hell of a main event contest, as the great Islam Makhachev locked horns with the pound-for-pound #1, Alexander Volkanovski. The fight was a hell of a lot closer than anyone could have imagined. As the smaller man, Volk made a tremendous account of himself. This included a massive fifth round that saw him drop the lightweight champ to the canvas. His takedown defense and overall technical mastery finally proved to be the perfect match to the Dagestan system of wrestling that had been dominating the game up to that point. And when all was said and done, despite Islam getting the nod from the judges, there were more than a few fans who believed that the decision should have gone to Volkanovski. And even with Islam winning under UFC's scoring criteria, most fans would agree that the moral victory went to the featherweight king. But Makhachev was the one to head home with the belt in his possession. And despite Volk earning some major respect from the fans, the questions over his next fight were pretty minimal. The interim champion in his own division, Yair Rodriguez, was very clearly next up. Islam's next challenge, however, not so clear. Many people would point to someone like Justin Gaethje, who just beat Rafael Fiziev, or even the winner of the upcoming Charles Oliveira vs. Beneil Dariush fight. Dariush, in particular, is a very interesting pick. He's a fresh name in the title picture who has never once fought for UFC gold, and that immediately gives him something that Chandler, Gaethje, Poirier, and Oliveira don't have. And his win over Gamrot last time around most certainly left little doubt over his standing amongst the very best in the world. His fight with Charles Oliveira has been rightfully pointed to as a title eliminator bout. A fight between a former champ and a streaking contender that should give us a sense of who is next in line for Makhachev. But here's where it gets complicated. Dariush gave an eye-opening interview to Submission Radio recently, and in it, while he did make his own desire to fight for UFC gold clear, he also dropped one hell of a bomb on us all. According to the top 5 UFC lightweight, the UFC has already decided on the identity of Makhachev's second title defense. And it's none other than the legend, Dustin the Diamond Poirier. Yeah, that's quite the shock, right? Well, it actually makes a bit of sense when you stop to think about it. Poirier is one of the few members of the top levels at lightweight who doesn't have an immediate opponent. Sure, a Gaethje rematch would solve that, but let's not forget who won the first one. And after beating and finishing Michael Chandler last time around, Poirier is in a better spot than most people give him credit for. In a division as stacked as 155 pounds is right now, one big name is sometimes going to be enough to single yourself out. And for a huge fight like Dustin, in a world where Colby Covington and Juliana Pena are being given shots, is Poirier's claim really that bad? Well, the main counter-argument is his recent track record with the belt on the line. The man has already gotten 2 title shots against the greatest lightweight champions of the decade. His first crack at the belt came when the Eagle himself, Khabib Nurmagomedov, ruled. And in that fight, despite coming closer than most to a win, with a guillotine choke that looked a little better than it actually was, Poirier was pretty confidently handled by Khabib in there. But that's nothing to be ashamed of. All fighters who cross paths with the Eagle have a habit of failing miserably. But Dustin didn't let this setback throw him off course too much, and after earning a win in his return against Dan Hooker, he went 2-0 over his greatest rival, Conor McGregor, establishing himself as a bona fide superstar in the process. And so, the UFC decided to give Poirier his second shot, this time against the informed Charles Oliveira, and this was always going to be a dangerous matchup for DP. Oliveira was hitting a level of devastating form in there that most fighters could only dream of reaching. Poirier had his moments, but in the end, Oliveira's pace and pressure forced him into a catastrophic mistake. And against a guy like Charles, you just cannot afford to make mistakes. Oliveira managed to take the back, similar to how Khabib did, and before Poirier knew what was happening, he was tapping to yet another rear naked choke in a UFC championship fight. Poirier was in a tough spot, but again, it's hard to keep a man this determined from rebounding in style. And that's exactly what he did, spending a hellacious 3 rounds in there with Michael Chandler before the submission victory in the 3rd round. And now, with his name firmly in the win column, it seems like Dustin is the preferred choice once again. Islam had been looking pretty indestructible up until Volkanovski got his chance, but even now, there's a real danger that some of these lightweights might get a little too confident. It takes a certain type of fighter to do what Volk was able to do to Islam. Does Poirier have that in him? Well, his track record wouldn't suggest that he does. I mean, just look at round 4 of Volk's fight with Islam, and round 3 of his classic fight against Brian Ortega. The dude is impossible to submit, even if you've taken his back or locked in your choke attempt. Does Poirier have that type of submission defense? Well, it certainly doesn't look like it, but he does bring other weapons to the table. He doesn't necessarily need to be the same as Volk to have a similar level of success. Poirier will no doubt have the striking advantage, but to be fair, so did a lot of Islam's former opponents. It's a tough fighter, but if there's one thing we can say for sure about Poirier right now, it's that he's still very much in his fighting prime, or close enough to it. And if Islam's confidence has been shaken in any way after his wrestling was stifled by Volk, a matchup with a veteran like Dustin Poirier could well spring up some very interesting results. And we can't talk about his matchup without addressing the elephant in the room. If Dustin Poirier wins and becomes the lightweight champion of the world, you can forget all about seeing Gaethje, Dariush, or any of these contenders getting their shots. No, a Dustin Poirier victory puts things in a very interesting position, because later this year, a pair of former opponents of DP are facing off to settle the score after the upcoming season of The Ultimate Fighter. And if Conor McGregor can successfully return with a win over Michael Chandler, are you telling me the UFC won't immediately jump on the chance to give the biggest star in the sport a title shot? Because that's the play right there. The UFC knows what they're doing, folks, and while we'd all love to see Beneil Dariush get what he deserves, Dana White and his team are in the business of making money. And after their trilogy fight ended by doctor stoppage, you'd better be willing to bet that the promotion will be able to market a 4th matchup between Dustin and Conor. There are a lot of ifs in there, but if Poirier can get his revenge over Khabib by taking out Islam, then Conor will no doubt be given the chance of getting his own, and the UFC will have one of the biggest fights of all time on their hands. In fact, it's pretty safe to assume that no matter who is in control of the belt by the end of the year, if Conor wins against Chandler, he is, without question, fighting for the title. And either way, there are 2 amazing revenge stories there. The one with Poirier we've already touched on, but how about setting the Notorious up for another collision with Team Khabib? Now that's a revenge story that will produce some major headlines. For now though, it does seem like the murky waters at 155 pounds are slowly clearing up. There are some very interesting times ahead for the lightweight title picture, that's for sure. From his tricky night at UFC 284 to a future dance with the Diamond, it certainly looks like the UFC has plans that may stretch far beyond the best interests of Islam Makhachev. But let's just wait and see what happens.